Hi guys, welcome to this landscape photo editing tutorial inside Luminar Neo. Today I'm keeping things pretty simple. I've got three key principles I'm going to share with you that are going to help get us to our end result. But don't be fooled by simplicity. They're really powerful concepts and you're going to be able to take them, make them your own and apply them to any one of your photos. First up, we're going to cover image preparation inside of Develop Raw, and this is so important to get right that you just cannot overlook it. Secondly, I recently shared a video on how to dodge and burn inside Luminar Neo, and I demonstrated that on portraiture, which is what it's often used for. However, dodge and burn is hugely useful for any genre of photography, so today we'll be looking at how that can be applied to landscape photography specifically. And thirdly, I've got a really great kind of secret color grading hack that we can use inside of Luminar Neo. I've been using it inside of Photoshop for years, but probably not many people know that you can use the same technique inside of Luminar Neo, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So with those three principles in mind, let's get into Neo and see what we can do. By now we all know that Luminar Neo can perform some pretty amazing feats with the editing tools that we have available. However, the most important thing we can do is set the foundations of our photo so that Luminar Neo actually has what it needs to perform the edit. And that involves bringing back all the highlight details and making sure that we have detail in our shadows too. Basically, we want a full tonal range from black to white, and we want good color rendition as well. And that's where our first step comes in, and we do it all through the Develop Raw tool here. I've preached this enough by now, so I'm sure you're all doing it, but if you're not, please photograph in Raw. Raw is just going to give you so much more data latitude for Luminar Neo to work with, and you're going to get so much more out of your editing experience than trying to push around a JPEG. Now, before we start coming down and grabbing the exposure slider and moving that around, what we want to do is make sure that we can see the tonal distribution in our photo. And how we do that is on Windows, we right click and come down to Show Histogram. And now all of a sudden we have our tonal distribution. And if you want to see your warnings to see where you're blowing out, just click on these little circles in the top left and top right. And then when you go too dark, it's going to let you know. Or if you go too bright, it's going to let you know. And so when you're working with these sliders, you just want to make sure that you're not peeking out on your highlights or your shadows. And so having these warnings on is a really good way to see that. If you want to reset any sliders, just double click them. So the first thing I'd recommend we do is we move out of the default Luminar profile and we go for something that's camera matching. So for example, you go for a camera vivid, and that's going to give you a very strong, contrasty, punchy look. However, what I prefer to do is work with either a camera neutral or a camera flat. The flatter we can get this profile initially, the better. So for sure, at the moment you might be thinking, well, that more contrasty profile, that looked better. And sure, maybe it did. However, what we want to do at the moment is actually minimize contrast, because that's going to help us bring back those highlights, boost those shadows. And once we've got all of that tonal information in play, it's at that point that we've given Luminar Neo what it needs for its foundations of the image. And from there, we can build all the more creative things we're going to do beyond that. So first off, I'm going to grab the highlights and start bringing that down into the negative territory. And as I do that, you can see that those little red highlight warnings are disappearing. So currently we're clipping no information. Luminar has all the information it needs in those highlights. If we look at the left-hand side of the histogram here, we can see that we have all the shadow tonal information that we need. However, I do find it just a little bit dark, and I'm just going to give it just a little bit of a helping hand just by boosting that up. And already just with those subtle changes, if we look at our before and after, you can see that we've come quite a long way with the image already. Now we've got all the tonal information in the image that we need. I'm now going to come into the blacks and whites, and I'm going to move these sliders just until we start seeing those clipping warnings again. And as soon as I see those little red dots appearing, I'm just going to ease it back until they disappear again. So I can push that all the way to 46, and now I'm going to do the same with the blacks. But you can see that as I move this to the left, the actual shape of the tone curve is changing. This section that represents the shadows is actually getting more pinched as I move that, and that's not really what I want. And so I'm just going to bring that back up just so that we have a more even distribution of those tones. And another way that we can tackle that and just make sure that we do have a pure black point without crushing all that information down is just to grab the bottom handle of the curves tool here, and as I move that to the right, ever so slightly, we're just starting to see those little blue clipping warnings on these cows here, just saying, hey, you've hit pure black. So just back that off just ever so slightly. And so I'm just going to push that just around there. And now with those changes, let's look at our before and our after. So this is where we came from, and now we have much more tonal range to work with in this image. Okay, let's address the colour balance. While I was experiencing this sunset, it felt much warmer than how the camera actually recorded it. However, I much prefer to start with a white balance that's going to render a more complete range of colours than if I was to shift the temperature one way or another and lose colour information. I would much prefer to start with that full range of colour and then manipulate it if need be later in the editing process. So with that in mind, I'm going to leave the white balance exactly as it is. I'm going to turn off these little clipping warnings and I'm going to move into the sharpness section here. So let's zoom into the grass and the cows here, and let's just grab this bad boy, give it a good crank up and see what Luminar does. So if we're viewing the grass, the cow, the sea, everything's looking pretty good. However, you always want to check your horizon line, because even though for the rest of it we're not seeing any halos, we are starting to see a little bit of that halo fringing where the land meets the sky. So I normally set my sharpening somewhere around the 50 mark, and I normally find that's a nice compromise, best of both worlds. I shot this at ISO 100, so I'm not going to worry about any noise reduction. However, if that is something that your file's suffering from, obviously you can come in and play with the luminosity slider whilst you're also working at like a zoom of 200 or so that you can actually see what that luminosity noise reduction is actually doing. However, I'm just going to leave that alone. I am going to jump into the optics section, and if you're working in RAW, you should have access to these, and I would always recommend just turning these on, and that's going to help Luminar clean up your image. And at this point, if we close down our develop RAW, we can use the / key on our keyboard to look at our before and our after. So before, a little bit washed out in the sky, very dark in the foreground. After, we have a much more harmonious and balanced image. Now, while that might not be the most exciting photo editing you're ever going to see, believe it or not, that is so important, because that is where you want to start pretty much any photo edit you ever do. We've just given Luminar the perfect platform to build any creative edit from. So whatever direction we want to take this photo from here, this is where we want to start. So now we're going to get a little bit more creative, take more control of our photo with a technique known as dodging and burning. And as you guys know, that is just the process of darkening down and lightening certain areas of our photo to better guide the viewer's eye around our image. Personally, this is one of my favorite photo editing techniques because it allows us to resculpt the light. If things weren't perfect or how we actually envisaged them, we can just give things a little bit of a massage, a little helping hand, and get it to look the way we want it to. So let me show you how that applies to landscape photography in Luminar Neo. So let me demonstrate the most basic form of dodge and burn, the classic vignette. If I grab the amount slider, slam that all the way to -100, we have just effectively burnt the corners of this photo. And if I jump to the advanced settings, a cool thing with Luminar Neo is we can actually increase the inner light, the brightness inside the vignette. And so now we have dodged the center part of our image. Yeah, sure, it looks absolutely awful right now. We could mitigate this slightly by cranking up the feather slider, get a smoother transition, but you get the idea. We have a brighter area in the center, that is known as dodging. We have a darker area around the edge, that is known as burning. But we have a much better way to dodge and burn, and that is using the develop tool. So forget looking for a dodge and burn specific tool. You're not going to find it, but that is because you don't need it. This is a much better way to do it because we have much more precise control. We can burn down the photo exactly to the amount we want, or brighten it up and we can dodge it to the amount we want, but we're going to kick things off with a burning down. So I'm just going to drop the exposure somewhere around there. From here we're going to jump into the masking section, and this is where our fine control comes in, because we're able to brush in precisely where we want this effect, or we can even use the linear, radial gradients, or even mask AI. For this one, what I might do is kick things off with the linear gradient, and I'm just going to click and drag down, and that is literally just going to darken down the top of the sky. Of course, we can't see it at the moment because we see where the mask is, but as soon as we jump out of this, we're going to see that effect of darkening applied to the top of the sky. Here's our before, here's our after. When I'm working with dodge and burn, I like to build the effect up incrementally. I don't try and tackle darkening things down all with just one develop tool, or conversely brightening things up with one develop tool. I'll build it up in stages, and that often involves multiple applications of that develop tool. However, a more methodical approach that you might take would be to consider your image globally. Like, where do you want to brighten, where do you want to darken globally? So for example, the vignette that we applied before, that's a global change. We're addressing the whole image. But let's say I want to brighten up just the mist on the horizon, or the tracks that are running across the hillside there. Those specific changes are local adjustments, and I would recommend just separating out your global from your localized adjustments. So first of all, let's tackle the global changes, then we'll dive in a little deeper into the more localized changes. So in terms of our global adjustments, what I'd like to do is just bring our viewer's attention more to the sunset area around here, just where it's poking over the hills. And at the same time, I want to remove attention from the extremities of the frame, and we do that by darkening things down. The viewer's eye always tends to go to the brightest part of an image. And so what I'm going to do is close down that develop tool, and so that change that we made to the sky now, that instance of the develop tool has now moved into our edit section here, so we can re-access it if we want to at any time. But now anytime we open up this develop tool, we're applying a new instance of this tool. And so we're going to darken things down one more time. We're going to jump into the masking section, and this time I may just grab a radial gradient just to kickstart things. And drawing that out will give us a circle, so I'm just going to move the center point of it around there. And now I can also grab these handles and actually change it more into an elliptical shape. If we hop back over to adjustments, we'll be able to see that change we've made. And what we've done so far is kind of like applying a vignette. However, we can now come in and be even more precise, so we can add to this effect. And so because we're working globally, I want to keep my brush size nice and big. However, I'm going to drop the strength down because I just want to build up this effect in subsequent passes. I'm just darkening the sky down there. And I feel like we've darkened down the hillside on the left here a little bit too much, so I just press X on my keyboard, and that's going to switch me between paint and erase mode. So now I've pressed X and I'm in erase mode. I'm just going to remove that effect, and I may even just take a little bit more of it away on the horizon line here. I want that to stay relatively bright. I'm going to push my brush size all the way to 400 and just remove it a little bit more from the sky. I don't want to be quite as heavy-handed as this. Maybe even remove it quite a lot from that left-hand side. All right, let's toggle our before and our after. Before and after. Bit of globalized burning around the edges there. We're going to open up another develop tool, and this time we're going to brighten up this section here where the sun is setting. And now as I grab the exposure and crank that up, you guys are actually going to be able to appreciate the benefit of using the develop tool over a dedicated dodge and burn tool. So at the moment I've set my brightness value, but you can see that we're starting to bleach out detail in this sunset. So while I want to brighten it up potentially this much, I don't want those highlights to blow out. And now, because we're using the develop tool, I can come in and grab the highlight slider and actually just bring those back down to make sure that we are protecting those highlights. And now I'm going to jump into the masking section, and again I can either brush this in or use a radial gradient. I think this time I'm just going to go and brush it straight in, go into the paint mode, click, and just move this over the horizon line. And each time I release and click again, I'm just applying this effect with slightly more intensity, so I can just build this up. Make the brush a bit smaller if I want to come in and just do this a little bit more refined just over the hillside here. And let's have a little check where we've come from and where we've got to. So we're definitely brightening up that area. And the cool thing is, if you do think you've overdone it, you can just jump back into your adjustments, come into the exposure slider and just taper this down. And I think giving it less of a bump is a little bit more subtle, a little bit more refined, and I like that. So now with those global dodge and burn changes applied, let's have a look at our before and our after. There we go, before and after. Now for a more precise localized dodge and burn, and we're going to follow the same principle as before. We're going to set up a develop tool where we're either brightening or darkening, the only difference being we're going to be more precise with where we paint it. And so what I'd like to do is actually brighten things up, so we're now dodging things in. I'm going to come to my masking tool, select my brush, and this time we want to make sure that we're working with quite a small brush, quite a low strength, because we want to build this up a little bit more subtly. And I'm clicking and just dragging, and I'm going to start trying to brighten up this little pathway we have through here. And you'll have to forgive me if I'm going a little bit over the lines and onto the grass. You don't have to be super precise with this, but I'm doing this with a mouse and I'm trying to do it relatively quickly just for the video. Back and forth, just trying to build this up incrementally. And when I'm doing this style of dodging and burning, this localized method where I'm trying to bring the viewer's attention to certain areas, I'm just looking for areas like these tracks where I want to say, hey, this is an area of visual interest, look here. I might be looking at the hillside here and think, okay, well, I've got the sun setting over the ridge behind. I'm envisaging the sun rays hitting and kissing this hillside, and so I'm brightening that up. We're literally painting with light. We're sculpting our ideal vision and pushing that into our image. Always good to check where you've come from and where you've got to, and just make sure that you're happy that you're tracking in the right direction. We could brighten up a band in the sky if we want to, and then work along the horizon line to brighten that as well, and just lead our viewer in further into our image. And then of course the sea working its way in towards the beach here, that's a beautiful part of the image, and I really want to draw our viewers' attention to it. Hence the reason I'm brightening the crests of the waves here and just saying to our viewer, these are important, look here. And if you feel like you've gone too far, like I do just along the foreground here, I may have just taken these particular tracks just a little bit too bright. You can come in by pressing X to change over to the Erase tool and just take away the effect if it's too strong. Same goes for the sea here. I think I may have just overcooked it ever so slightly, so I'm just going to pull that back a little bit. And the horizon on the left hand side as well. One of the reasons I really like dodging and burning is because it's bringing just a little bit sort of more artistry into your photography. Okay, let's have a little look where we came from and where we've got to just with this one application of the dodge tool or develop tool that we've used to dodge our photo. Here's our before, here's our after. Already, hopefully you can see by looking at the original photo and where we've got to just how powerful this approach is. We've used Develop Raw to set the foundations of the photo, and then we've used the dodge and burn technique to selectively brighten and darken certain areas. Now I would love to dive into Luminar Neo's creative tools and really go to town on this, but whenever I make a long video, people will always complain in the comments, your videos are too long. So in the name of a more condensed YouTube friendly video, I'm going to jump straight to the color grading technique. I absolutely love this technique and I think you guys will too. Listen, if you love the look of Luminar Neo and you don't have it yet, I've got a link in the description below that you can use. That also helps me out with my channel because I do get a very small commission and that means the world to me, helps me keep creating this free content for you. So let me show you that technique. Okay, here it is guys, one of my absolute favorite ways to color grade, and I think it's a little bit of a secret, right? We're going to come down, we're going to open up the mood section here. No, we're not going to do that at all. That's far too obvious. What we're going to do is add a solid color as a brand new layer, and then we're going to manipulate the way that that layer interacts with what's below. It may sound complicated, but it's going to make sense. Here we go. We're going to add a new layer, and here you can see I have some different color swatches, but all we need is just one. So I'm going to open up this red here, but honestly, it doesn't matter what color you go with. And normally in the mapping we would either fill or stretch this to make sure we're covering the whole frame, but just for demonstration purposes I'm actually just going to keep it at fit, reduce the size ever so slightly, and then you can see exactly what's going on. So I'm going to crank the opacity all the way to 100, so now we have a solid colour over the top of our image. And just below the opacity we can see the blending mode. Currently we are in normal, nothing fancy, but if we click on this, this will give us a drop down and we can actually come through and select different blending modes. And depending on which mode we select, the colour is going to interact differently with what's underneath. Now when we're talking about colorization, you might think you want to come down here and select colour. However, that's not what I'd recommend. For what we're trying to achieve here, the two most useful blending modes are overlay and soft light. So soft light is similar to overlay but just not quite as intense, and that is the option that I'm going to go for here, soft light. But what if this isn't the color we actually want to go for? Do we come over and load a different color? Well no, as I said, we only need one color to work with, because what we can do with this layer selected, we can come over to the color option here and scroll all the way to the bottom where you see the hue shift. As I start moving this, you'll see that the actual color that we're creating is changing, and that is because we're literally changing the color of this red layer and then it's being applied to the image underneath using this soft light mode. And this is a really nice way to push color into your image. And so if I want to change this and just perfect it, I'm just going to jump into the edit section where I'm going to find that color adjustment. I can't see that hue shift, so I need to drop down this panel here, and there it is right at the bottom. And now I can tweak this left and right, and I think I'm going to go for more of a purpley hue that to me is reminiscent of what I saw when I was there. So now all I need to do is just jump back into the layer properties and make sure that this is expanded over the whole image. So if I click fill, there you go, it's over the whole photo. And if you feel like it's just a little bit too much, we grab the opacity slider and we can just move this up and down and settle on that where we feel happy. For me, one of the big advantages that Luminar Neo has over Luminar AI is that we can use tools multiple times. We can reapply effects to really finesse our images, and that's what I'd recommend we do with this kind of color grading tool. Well, absolutely, we could stop at that broad application of a color grade over the whole photo. What if we want to take things a little bit further? Like, I'm thinking, how about we take the sunset and imbue it with more orangey goodness? And how we do that is really simple. We're literally going to duplicate the layer we've already used and just manipulate the color so we create more of that orangey goodness. Right, let's do that. So I'm going to come over to the layer that we have selected here, and I have the option to hide the layer so we can see our original. I can show the layer. Or thankfully, what's been added to the latest version of Luminar is duplicate layer. And as soon as that's been duplicated, you can now see that we have double of that purple effect, which isn't what I'm after in this case. And so I'm going to jump into the edit section where we can actually access that hue shift. And I'm going to grab the hue shift slider and start moving that to the right until I start hitting more orangey tones. Something like that is good, and if we wanted to, we could play with the saturation slider and boost that up a little further as well. But the main thing we want to do is mask the effect in, and I'm going to do that with a brush on this instance. We're going to paint it in. Strength of 11 is fine for now, and I'm just going to start going over this section here. I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, just using my right bracket key, and I may just pop that strength just a little higher, just so I can get it done a bit quicker. You know what, I think this underlying layer is just a little bit too purple, so I'm going to jump back in and just make a little adjustment with that. Okay, I prefer that, it's just a little bit more natural. I can't help myself, guys, I've just got to do a little bit more. I'm just going to add a little bit more warmth into this sunset here by adding a little bit of orange with a radial mask and just feather that out. And of course, add one of my favourite tools, which is Mystical, which is just going to add a little bit more contrast. Alright, so let's take a look at our original file and let's see what we were able to achieve using the tools in Luminar Neo. So there you go, guys, that's a really fast and effective way to colour wash or colour grade your whole image. But for me, the real power comes to us as photo editors when we combine techniques like this with the other really creative tools inside Luminar Neo. So have fun, get up to speed with dodge and burn, try this colour grading technique, and then combine that with the other skill set that you already have, and just have fun creating some really cool images inside of Luminar Neo. I'll see you next time, guys. Another video, as always, popping up there, so just keep watching them, man. I'll see you in that video. If you haven't subscribed already, click the subscribe button, and yeah, that's it. I'm outie for this one. I can never click my knuckles. I tell my kids off for clicking their knuckles, and then I just did it. What am I like?